The Antarctica, you know, is ice. But beneath that ice exists another Antarctica, with mountains, rivers, canyons, and lakes, with liquid water that has not seen sunlight for 15 million years, with air sealed 6 million years ago, before our species existed. 200 million years ago, Antarctica was a tropical forest. Then it froze and buried its history under 4 kilometers of ice. And now we are slowly, with radar, drills, and satellites, reading what it hid. This is the story of what this world was, how it died, and what the ice preserves about our future. Before we go any further, please subscribe to this channel. Your support really helps us to continue our work. Thank you. There is a particular kind of humility that comes from confronting the limits of human knowledge about the planet we live on. We have mapped the surface of Mars at resolutions of 25 centimeters per pixel. We have detailed topographic maps of Venus, Mercury, and the Moon. We have radar imagery of Titan's methane lakes and Pluto's nitrogen glaciers, and the subglacial landscape of Antarctica, the continent that occupies 10% of Earth's land surface, the continent that contains 90% of Earth's fresh water, the continent whose ice sheet directly determines the sea level experienced by every coastal city on Earth, is known to us at lower resolution than the surface of the Moon. A study published in 2018 reviewing the state of knowledge of Antarctica's bedrock put it plainly: the subglacial landscape of Antarctica is less well known than that of Mars. This was not a rhetorical exaggeration. It was a factual comparison of measurement densities, resolution limits, and data coverage. The bedrock beneath the Antarctic ice sheet has been mapped primarily through airborne radar surveys, in which aircraft fly at low altitude over the ice and emit radar pulses that penetrate the ice and reflect back from the bedrock below, with the travel time of the pulse used to calculate the depth of the ice and the elevation of the bedrock. These surveys are extraordinary technical achievements conducted in some of the most hostile weather conditions on Earth, by teams who spend months camped in temperatures that fall below minus 40 degrees Celsius. And despite decades of effort, the coverage is still uneven, the resolution in many areas is still coarse, and every new survey campaign produces revelations that the previous surveys missed entirely. On June 4th of 2026, 4 days before this script was completed, a paper was published in the journal Nature Geoscience describing the discovery of a massive geological structure beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet that had gone entirely unrecognized by the scientific community until now. The structure, named the East Antarctic Fan-Shaped Basin Province by the international research team that discovered it, is not a small feature. It encompasses several of Antarctica's best-known subglacial features: the Wilkes Basin, the Aurora Basin, and the basin that contains Lake Vostok, the largest known subglacial lake on Earth, all of which had previously been understood as separate, independent geological features. The new research reveals that these features are actually parts of a single, coherent geological structure of continental scale, formed by rotational extension of the crust over multiple tectonic episodes linked to the formation and breakup of the Gondwana supercontinent. The discovery was made not by a new survey, but by a new synthesis, by combining existing datasets of subglacial topography, geological observations, gravity measurements, and magnetic anomaly data in a way that had not been done before, and recognizing in the combined data a pattern that was invisible in any single dataset alone. The feature had been in the data for years. Nobody had seen it as a single thing until now. This is one of the defining characteristics of Antarctic science. The continent is so large and the ice so opaque that its secrets reveal themselves not in dramatic expeditions, but in the patient accumulation and reanalysis of data. In the moment when a scientist looking at a map suddenly sees a pattern that changes the meaning of everything around it. To understand why Antarctica is what it is today, and why discovering what lies beneath its ice requires such extraordinary effort, you need to go back not 4 kilometers to the base of the ice sheet, but 200 million years to the supercontinent that Antarctica was once part of. 200 million years ago, Antarctica was not a continent. It was a portion of Gondwana, the southern supercontinent that also comprised what would become South America, Africa, India, and Australia. The Antarctic continental crust was joined to the Australian crust along a suture zone that ran through what is now the Southern Ocean, fused to the African crust in the region that is now the Weddell Sea, and continuous with the South American crust across what is now the Drake Passage. Gondwana itself was the southern half of Pangaea, the single supercontinent that comprised all of Earth's landmass at the beginning of the Mesozoic era. At this time, the land surface that would eventually become Antarctica occupied a position that was not entirely polar. The Gondwana landmass was large enough that its southern portions, including the proto-Antarctic crust, were at high latitudes, but the configuration of the continents meant that ocean currents could reach the polar regions, moderating temperatures and preventing the formation of a permanent ice sheet. The climate of Gondwana during the Triassic and Jurassic periods was, by modern standards, extraordinarily warm. Mean global temperatures were perhaps 8 to 14 degrees Celsius higher than today. Polar ice was absent or minimal, and the forests of the Gondwana landmass extended to latitudes that are today deep inside the Antarctic Circle. The fossil record of this warm Antarctic world is extraordinary in what it reveals and heartbreaking in what it requires to obtain. Antarctica has, as a result of its permanent ice cover, the worst fossil record of any continent. More than 99% of its area is covered year-round in ice and snow, and the rock outcrops that do exist are scattered, remote, and accessible only during the brief Antarctic summer. But the fossils that have been found tell a story of extraordinary biological richness. The Transantarctic Mountains, which rise above the ice in a chain extending across the continent, expose Devonian and Carboniferous sedimentary sequences containing the same plant fossils. Glossopteris, the seed fern that covered Gondwana, that are found in South Africa, South America, Australia, and India. These were not just similar plants. They were the same plants, growing on a continuous landmass, their fossilized leaves now scattered across 5 separate continents by the tectonic forces that pulled Gondwana apart. During the Cretaceous period, approximately 100 million years ago, the Antarctic continent was already separating from the rest of Gondwana. Africa had departed much earlier. India was on its way north toward its eventual collision with Asia, and Australia was beginning the slow drift northward that would eventually separate it from Antarctica approximately 34 million years ago. But the land that is now Antarctica was, in the Cretaceous, covered in temperate to subtropical forest. Fossilized wood from this period, actual wood preserved by the unusual geochemical conditions of Antarctic soils, has been found in the Transantarctic mountains and in the peninsula region. The trees were not tropical giants, but they were real forests. Communities of southern beech, conifer, and other trees growing at latitudes that today receive no sunlight for months at a time. The fossils of dinosaurs have been found in Antarctica. Not just small scavengers, but medium-sized ornithopods and sauropods, animals that had no tolerance for extreme cold and whose presence confirms that the Antarctic climate of the Cretaceous was genuinely temperate. The most poignant expression of this fossil record is the story that Robert Falcon Scott carried to his death. In November of 1912, a search party found the frozen bodies of Scott and his companions in their tent on the Ross ice shelf, 11 miles from the depot that might have saved them. Scott and his companions had died on their return journey from the South Pole, having arrived there on January 17, 1912, to find that Roald Amundsen's Norwegian team had beaten them by 35 days. Alongside the bodies of Scott, Wilson, and Bowers, the search party found 35 pounds of fossils, rocks collected from a coal seam on the Beardmore Glacier that Wilson had identified as scientifically significant during their outward journey. Scott had ordered that the fossil samples be kept, refusing to jettison weight that might have improved their chances of survival. The fossils of Glossopteris leaf impressions were found in the rocks, direct evidence that Antarctica had once been part of the same Gondwana forest that covered southern Africa and South America. The fossils made it back to London. Scott did not. The geological evidence that Antarctica had once been warm and forested arrived in Britain preserved in the same canvas sacks that Scott had refused to leave behind. To understand what Scott's fossils represented, what world they were a relic of, requires reconstructing the Antarctica of 60 to 100 million years ago with enough specificity to make it feel real rather than abstract. The numbers are easy. Temperatures 8 to 14 degrees warmer than today, CO2 concentrations 2 to 4 times higher than pre-industrial levels, no permanent polar ice anywhere on Earth. What those numbers actually meant for the landscape and life of the Antarctic continent requires more than arithmetic. The forests that covered Antarctica during the Cretaceous and early Paleogene were not the tropical rainforests of the modern Amazon or Congo. They were high-latitude forests, communities of trees adapted to the extreme seasonality of polar light, growing through long polar summers of continuous daylight and surviving polar winters of continuous darkness in a dormant state analogous to the deciduous trees of modern temperate regions. The dominant trees were southern beeches of the genus Nothofagus, the same genus that today forms the cold temperate forests of southern South America, New Zealand, and Tasmania, along with various conifers, tree ferns, and flowering plants. These were not diminutive scrub forests. Fossil wood recovered from Cretaceous Antarctic sediments shows growth rings of considerable width, indicating rapid summer growth, and trunk diameters that suggest trees reaching heights of 20 to 30 meters. Antarctica was not a marginal habitat for these trees. It was a productive, biologically complex forest ecosystem. The animals that inhabited this forest world were, by the Cretaceous, a mixture of the familiar and the utterly strange. Dinosaurs were present. The Antarctic Peninsula region has yielded fossils of several dinosaur species, including ankylosaurs, ornithopods, and possibly sauropods, animals whose physiology required temperatures that would have been lethal in modern Antarctica, even in summer. The dinosaur fossils from Antarctica are among the most geographically extreme vertebrate records in the Mesozoic. They document animals living at latitudes of 70 to 80 degrees south, in an environment that experienced 4 to 5 months of complete polar darkness each year. How the dinosaurs managed the polar winter is unknown, whether they migrated, hibernated, or simply tolerated the darkness with some form of physiological adaptation. But their presence confirms that the warmth of the Cretaceous climate was genuine and consistent, not merely a brief summer peak. Alongside the dinosaurs, the Cretaceous Antarctic fauna included early mammals, small, shrew-like creatures occupying the same marginal ecological roles that their Mesozoic relatives occupied everywhere else on Earth. There were flying reptiles, pterosaurs, whose fossils have been found on Seymour Island in the Antarctic Peninsula, their wingspans suggesting animals of considerable size soaring over what was then a warm, shallow coastal sea rather than the frozen ocean that surrounds Antarctica today. There were marine reptiles, plesiosaurs and mosasaurs, in the waters around the continent, taking advantage of the productive coastal seas that a warm polar ocean supported. By the time the dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago, Antarctica was already beginning its slow thermal decline. The continent had been drifting toward its current polar position throughout the Cretaceous, and while it was still warm enough to support forests, the first signs of cooling were appearing in the geological record. In the Paleocene and Eocene epochs following the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction, Antarctica experienced a complex climate history. Not a simple linear cooling, but a series of warm and cool intervals, with the most dramatic warmth of the Cenozoic occurring during the early Eocene climatic optimum, approximately 50 to 52 million years ago, when global temperatures were 5 to 8 degrees warmer than today, and palm trees grew in what is now Wyoming and London. During the early Eocene climatic optimum, Antarctica was still connected to both South America and Australia. Its forests were subtropical rather than temperate. Fossilized pollen from this period includes the signatures of plants that require genuinely warm temperatures, and the insects preserved in the Antarctic fossil record of the early Eocene include relatives of modern tropical groups. The continent was green, wet, warm by today's standards, and biologically diverse in ways that the current ice sheet makes almost impossible to imagine. The fauna of Eocene Antarctica is known primarily from Seymour Island on the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula, which has become one of the most important Paleogene fossil sites in the world precisely because it represents a geographic extreme, the southernmost record of the warm Eocene world, the biological frontier of a global greenhouse climate. Seymour Island has yielded fossils of early penguins, enormous non-flying birds that had already abandoned aerial flight for aquatic pursuit even in the warm Eocene, reaching heights of up to 1.8 meters in the largest species. It has yielded fossils of early whales, the first cetaceans, still in the process of transitioning from land to sea, their hind limbs vestigial but still present, swimming in what was then a warm polar sea. It has yielded fossils of ancient sharks, rays, bony fish, sea turtles, and a diversity of invertebrates that speaks to a warm, productive coastal marine ecosystem of extraordinary biological richness. And then, over the course of the next 15 million years, the Eocene ended and the ice came. The cooling that produced the Antarctic ice sheet was not a simple linear decline from warm to cold. It was punctuated, complex, and driven by the interaction of multiple factors operating on different timescales. The long-term trend was driven by the declining atmospheric CO2 and the progressive tectonic isolation of Antarctica as it separated from Australia and the Drake Passage opened. But superimposed on this trend were orbital cycles. The Milankovitch cycles of Earth's axial tilt and orbital eccentricity that drove the ice ages of the Pleistocene, and that were already operating at somewhat different amplitudes during the Eocene and Oligocene. The forests did not simply freeze. They died in stages as the climate cooled and the seasons lengthened and the winter darkness grew more severe. The subtropical plants disappeared first, the palms and the tropical affinity ferns, and the warmth-demanding flowering plants that had been present in the early Eocene gave way to progressively more cold-tolerant assemblages as the cooling progressed through the middle and late Eocene. The nothofagus beech forests and the conifers, the temperate plants that could survive cold winters in dormancy, persisted longer, holding on in the more sheltered lower latitude portions of the continent, as the higher altitude and higher latitude areas became first seasonally glaciated and then permanently ice-covered. The animals followed the plants, first the tropical affinity groups disappearing, then the temperate groups becoming increasingly restricted, until the accelerating glaciation of the early Oligocene sealed the fate of the terrestrial ecosystem entirely. The moment when the last tree died in Antarctica, when the last nothofagus dropped its last leaf at the edge of the advancing ice sheet and was not replaced by any new growth, is not preserved in the fossil record with sufficient precision to identify it as a single event. But it happened. Somewhere between 34 and 33 million years ago, the last surviving forest of what had been a continuous Antarctic woodland stretching back to the Cretaceous was buried under the advancing ice. The trees that were growing in the path of the ice would have been entombed, their wood and leaves preserved in the sediment beneath the ice, waiting for the erosion of the ice sheet or the drilling of a borehole to expose them again. Some of those trees may still be there, preserved in the sediments at the base of the ice sheet, undiscovered. The world that Scott's fossils documented, the warm, forested Antarctica of the Cretaceous and early Paleogene, began its final transformation approximately 34 million years ago, at the boundary between the Eocene and Oligocene epochs. This transition, known as the Eocene-Oligocene transition, or EOT, is one of the most dramatic climate events in the Cenozoic record, and its primary cause was the opening of the Drake Passage. The Drake Passage is the body of water that separates the southern tip of South America from the Antarctic Peninsula, the region that is today the most turbulent stretch of open ocean on Earth, where the Southern Ocean is compressed between two continental margins and the Antarctic circumpolar current flows at maximum intensity. Before Australia separated from Antarctica and before the Drake Passage opened, this body of water did not exist. The southern tip of South America was connected to the Antarctic Peninsula by a continuous landmass, the same landmass that, on the other side of Antarctica, connected Antarctica to Australia. When these connections broke, Australia drifting north around 34 million years ago, and the Drake Passage opening around the same time in a process that is still actively debated in the geological literature. a critical change occurred in the circulation of the Southern Ocean. Before the separation, warm ocean currents could reach the high-latitude Southern Ocean from lower latitudes, carrying heat from the tropics to the polar region and moderating Antarctic temperatures. After the separation, the Antarctic circumpolar current formed, a massive, persistent current that circled Antarctica continuously, driven by the winds of the roaring 40s and furious 50s, carrying more water than all the rivers of the world combined. The Antarctic circumpolar current acted as a thermal barrier, preventing warm tropical water from reaching the Antarctic coast. The continent was effectively isolated within a ring of cold water, and its temperature began to fall. But the circumpolar current was not working alone. The concentration of atmospheric carbon dioxide, which had been elevated during the Cretaceous at levels that maintained the warm global climate, had been declining through the Eocene as geological processes removed carbon from the atmosphere. Enhanced silicate weathering as the Himalayas rose, increased organic carbon burial in newly formed ocean basins, reduced volcanic outgassing as tectonic activity changed. By the time the Antarctic circumpolar current had established itself, CO2 concentrations had fallen to a threshold below which the Antarctic cooling could not be reversed by remaining heat fluxes. The ice began to form. The transition was geologically rapid. The deep-sea sediment record, which provides the most continuous and precisely dated record of oceanographic and climatic change, shows that the formation of the Antarctic ice sheet happened over approximately 400,000 years, from about 34 million to 33.6 million years ago. In those 400,000 years, the global climate changed from a largely ice-free world to one in which Antarctica was covered by an ice sheet of approximately 25 to 30 million cubic kilometers of ice. The global consequences of those 70 meters of sea level drop, the exposed continental shelves, the displaced coastlines, the biological communities forced into contracted habitats, have already been described in the context of the ice sheet's formation. What bears adding here is the oceanographic dimension, the simultaneous reorganization of deep ocean circulation. It was a global reorganization of ocean, climate, and biology, driven by the freezing of a single continent. The Oligocene and Miocene ice sheets waxed and waned with changes in Earth's orbital geometry and atmospheric CO2 concentrations. There were intervals during the Miocene, approximately 15 to 17 million years ago, when parts of the Antarctic ice sheet retreated significantly, and the continent may have experienced partial deglaciation. The ice sheet that exists today in its current configuration formed approximately 15 million years ago during the Middle Miocene cooling, when CO2 concentrations fell further and global temperatures dropped to the range within which the Antarctic ice sheet became dynamically stable against all but the most extreme future warming scenarios. It is beneath this ice, the ice that has been present in essentially its current configuration for 15 million years, that the hidden Antarctica exists. And the most remarkable feature of the hidden Antarctica is not its mountains or its canyons. It is its liquid water. Antarctica contains over 400 known subglacial lakes, bodies of liquid water that exist at the base of the ice sheet, kept from freezing by the combination of geothermal heat from the bedrock below and the insulating pressure of the ice above. The largest and most famous of these is Lake Vostok, located beneath the Russian Vostok Station in East Antarctica at a depth of approximately 4 kilometers of ice. Lake Vostok is not a small pond. It is approximately 250 kilometers long and 50 kilometers wide, comparable in surface area to Lake Ontario in North America. With a maximum water depth of approximately 900 meters. The total volume of water in Lake Vostok is approximately 5,000 cubic kilometers. It has been isolated from the surface atmosphere and from direct sunlight for somewhere between 15 and 25 million years. The discovery, or more precisely the confirmation, of Lake Vostok as a liquid water body was itself a long and contentious story. Russian scientists drilling at Vostok Station had been approaching the lake surface since the 1970s. But the decision of when and how to drill into the lake was complicated by concerns about contaminating a body of water that had been isolated for geological time with surface microorganisms brought down by the drill. In February of 2012, the Russian team finally reached the lake surface, allowing lake water to rise into the borehole under pressure and refreeze there, creating a plug of refrozen lake water that could be recovered and analyzed in subsequent drilling seasons. The analysis of this refrozen water found bacteria, living microorganisms in water that had been sealed under ice since the Middle Miocene. Whether the bacteria were actually living in the lake or were contamination from the drill is still actively debated, but the structural conditions for microbial life in Lake Vostok, liquid water, geothermal heat, dissolved minerals from the bedrock, are not in doubt. The new East Antarctic fan-shaped basin province, discovered in June of 2026, encompasses the basin containing Lake Vostok as one of its components, along with the Wilkes Basin and the Aurora Basin, two of the largest subglacial basins in East Antarctica, each covering areas comparable to the largest lakes on Earth's surface. The discovery that these basins are not independent geological features, but are components of a single coherent structure formed by rotational extension of the crust during the Gondwana breakup, has profound implications for understanding how the ice sheet behaves, the shape of the bedrock underneath the ice controls where subglacial water accumulates, how it flows, and how quickly it can reach the ocean. And all of these factors directly influence the rate at which the ice sheet above the basins can slide and potentially collapse in a warming climate. The fan-shaped structure appears to control the location of the major subglacial drainage pathways that connect the interior of the East Antarctic ice sheet to the coast, meaning that the newly recognized tectonic heritage of the continent is directly relevant to projections of sea level rise. The hidden landscape beneath the ice is not simply an abstract geological curiosity. It has specific features, named, measured, and in some cases profoundly strange, that deserve individual attention. The Gamburtsev Mountains are perhaps the most extraordinary geographical feature on Earth that most people have never heard of. They are a mountain range buried under approximately 3 kilometers of ice in the interior of East Antarctica, rising approximately 3,000 meters above the surrounding bedrock. Their highest peaks reach approximately 2,700 meters above sea level, comparable to the Alps. They were first detected by a Soviet seismic survey in 1958 and have been studied by radar surveys ever since, most comprehensively during the ATGAP campaign, the Antarctica's Gamburtsev Province project, in 2008 and 2009, which produced the first high-resolution three-dimensional image of the range. The Gamburtsev Mountains are ancient. Their roots extend deep into the Precambrian crust, and the mountains themselves appear to have been uplifted approximately 250 million years ago during the Permian period, roughly coinciding with the Permian-Triassic extinction event. They were then buried not by sediment, but by ice, preserved beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet in essentially the same state as they existed at the time of the first glaciation. They are an alpine landscape, frozen in time, inaccessible beneath 3 kilometers of ice, known to us only through the indirect signature of radar pulses that have never been seen by human eyes. The Denman Canyon is deeper than the Grand Canyon of the Colorado. The subglacial trench beneath the Denman Glacier in East Antarctica descends approximately 3,500 meters below sea level at its deepest point. The deepest point on continental Earth outside the ocean floor, deeper than any cave system, deeper than any other terrestrial canyon. The ice above this canyon reaches extraordinary thicknesses, more than 4 kilometers in some locations. And the glacier that flows through it is one of the most dynamic in East Antarctica, draining a significant portion of the East Antarctic ice sheet into the ocean through this single, deep, narrow pathway. The depth of the Denman Canyon below sea level means that if the ice currently filling it were to retreat, warm ocean water would have direct access to the deep interior of the canyon, creating conditions potentially analogous to what is already happening at Thwaites in West Antarctica. The longest river in Antarctica is not a river of water, but a river of ice. The Lambert Glacier, which flows from the East Antarctic Plateau to the Amory Ice Shelf, in a continuous stream approximately 500 kilometers long and up to 100 kilometers wide, making it the largest glacier in the world by area. But there is also a liquid river, the Onyx River in the McMurdo Dry Valleys, which flows for approximately 32 kilometers from the Wright Lower Glacier to Lake Vanda during the Antarctic summer melt season, making it the longest river on the continent that flows over bare rock rather than ice. The McMurdo Dry Valleys are one of the strangest landscapes on Earth, a region of Antarctica where the katabatic winds that blow down from the polar plateau are so cold and dry that they evaporate all precipitation before it can accumulate, leaving a rocky desert landscape surrounded by glaciers that never flows into the valleys. These valleys are so dry, so cold, and so biologically sparse that NASA has used them as a test environment for instruments intended for Mars, a place on Earth that is, in terms of its environmental conditions, more Mars-like than almost anywhere else on the planet. Lake Vanda, where the Onyx River terminates, is itself a remarkable body of water. It is a perennially ice-covered lake approximately 5 kilometers long and 70 meters deep, and its water column shows an extraordinary thermal structure. The surface water beneath the ice is close to 0 degrees Celsius, as expected, but the bottom water at 60 to 700 meters depth is approximately 25 degrees Celsius. This thermal inversion, warm water at the bottom and cold at the top, is maintained by the unique combination of solar radiation penetrating the clear ice cover and warming the saline bottom water, combined with the density stratification of the water column that prevents the warm bottom water from mixing with the cold surface water. Lake Vanda is simultaneously a cold lake and a warm lake, a geological contradiction maintained by the peculiar energy balance of the Antarctic polar environment. The subglacial lakes of Antarctica are not just geological features. They are the reference standard against which the habitability of Europa and Enceladus is being measured, a point we will return to when we consider the biology of this hidden world. The NASA Europa Clipper spacecraft, launched in October of 2024, is currently en route to the Jupiter system and will begin its orbital survey of Europa in 2030. One of its primary science objectives is to characterize the habitability of Europa's subsurface ocean, to assess whether the conditions for life, as defined by our experience of life in the most extreme environments on Earth, are present beneath Europa's ice shell. The conditions being used to define habitability: the presence of liquid water, energy sources, and chemical nutrients, are precisely the conditions that the subglacial lakes of Antarctica have demonstrated can support microbial life. The Antarctic subglacial environment is not just an interesting geological feature. It is the reference standard against which the habitability of extraterrestrial oceans is being measured. Enceladus, Saturn's small, ice-covered moon that the Cassini spacecraft revealed to be venting water vapor and organic compounds from its south polar region, presents an even more directly accessible case for life. The plumes of material erupting from Enceladus's south pole have been directly sampled by Cassini's mass spectrometer, and the sample includes water, carbon dioxide, methane, hydrogen, ammonia, and complex organic molecules, including some that could only be produced by the kind of hydrothermal chemistry that occurs when hot water contacts rock rich in organic carbon. The hydrogen in the plumes is particularly significant. It is the signature of serpentinization, the same geochemical reaction that is occurring in the serpentinized rocks beneath Antarctic subglacial lakes, and that produces hydrogen as an energy source that chemolithotrophic bacteria on Earth actively consume. If similar bacteria exist in the hydrothermal environment at the base of Enceladus's internal ocean, and the chemical conditions detected by Cassini are entirely consistent with this, they would be doing exactly what their Antarctic counterparts do: extracting energy from the chemistry of water reacting with rock in complete isolation from sunlight at temperatures close to freezing, in an environment that looks from the outside like a lifeless ball of ice. The subglacial water system of Antarctica, the rivers, lakes, and drainage channels that exist at the base of the ice sheet, is far more dynamic than early researchers assumed. The model of subglacial water as a static, slowly evolving system has been replaced over the past 2 decades by a picture of active, episodic drainage events in which subglacial lakes fill from meltwater, generated at the base of the ice by geothermal heat and glacial friction, and then drain suddenly through subglacial river systems, releasing large volumes of water to the ocean in pulses that last months to years. In February of 2025, researchers published the first complete model of water flow beneath the entire Antarctic ice sheet, mapping the routes by which water generated at the base of the ice travels across the bedrock landscape toward the ocean. The model revealed a drainage network of unexpected complexity: thousands of kilometers of interconnected drainage pathways, multiple large accumulation areas, and a series of critical locations where small changes in the balance between water input and drainage can trigger large-scale reorganizations of the subglacial drainage pattern, with potentially significant consequences for ice flow. The ice itself, The 4 kilometers of compacted snow that sits above this hidden landscape is one of the most remarkable archives of Earth's climate history that exists anywhere on the planet. Snow that falls on the Antarctic ice sheet is compressed by the weight of subsequent snowfall, the air bubbles between the snow crystals being progressively reduced in size until they are sealed as tiny inclusions within the ice crystal structure. These sealed air bubbles preserve samples of the atmosphere at the time the snow fell. Samples that, if the ice is old enough, preserve atmospheric compositions that no other archive can provide. The carbon dioxide concentration, the methane concentration, the oxygen isotope ratios of the water molecules, the concentrations of volcanic dust and sea salt. All of these are preserved in the ice with a fidelity that makes ice cores from Antarctica the single most important archive of quaternary climate that exists. In January of 2025, the European Beyond Epica project reached a new drilling milestone at the Little Dome sea site in East Antarctica, successfully extracting an ice core that extended to a depth corresponding to ice more than 1.2 million years old. This ice core extends the continuous Antarctic climate record, the record of temperature and greenhouse gas concentrations preserved in ice, back through more than 1 million years of glacial-interglacial cycles into the period before the mid-Pleistocene transition, when the dominant rhythm of ice ages shifted from cycles of approximately 41,000 years to cycles of approximately 100,000 years. The driving force of this transition has been one of the major unsolved questions of quaternary climate science, and the Beyond Epica core provides the first direct ice record of the atmospheric conditions during this transition. But the Beyond Epica record was dramatically extended in the opposite direction by a discovery at the Allen Hills site in East Antarctica that was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in October of 2025, and whose significance continues to resonate through the climate science community. The Allen Hills is a region of East Antarctica where the ice sheet is flowing upward, where deep, old ice is being brought to the surface by the dynamics of ice flow over a bedrock obstacle, creating what glaciologists call a blue ice area, where ancient ice is exposed at the surface rather than buried under kilometers of younger ice. Scientists had known for decades that very old ice could be found near the surface at Allen Hills. But the drilling campaign conducted by the NSF Coldex team, the Center for Oldest Ice Exploration, a collaboration of 15 United States research institutions, produced results that exceeded expectations by an enormous margin. The oldest ice sample recovered from the Allen Hills in the Coldex campaign has been dated to approximately 6 million years, more than 5 times older than the continuous Beyond Epica record, and more than 4 times older than any directly dated ice previously recovered from Antarctica. This ice, and the air bubbles sealed within it, preserve samples of Earth's atmosphere from the Miocene epoch, a period when the global climate was significantly warmer than today. Sea levels were tens of meters higher than they are now, and the Antarctic ice sheet was in a different, less stable configuration than the one that exists today. The carbon dioxide concentrations measured in these 6 million-year-old air bubbles provide a direct empirical measurement of the atmospheric chemistry during a period that is used as an analog for the projected climate of the late 21st and 22nd centuries under current greenhouse gas emission trajectories. The ancient air speaks directly to the future. The process of extracting that ancient air, of drilling through 4 kilometers of ice to reach samples sealed millions of years ago, is one of the most technically demanding and logistically challenging scientific operations that exists anywhere in the world. Understanding it makes the results more meaningful. An ice core drilling operation in Antarctica begins months before the first drill turns. The equipment, the drill itself, the fluid used to prevent the borehole from collapsing under the pressure of the surrounding ice, the laboratory instruments for analyzing the cores, the fuel for the generators, the food for the team. All of it must be transported to a site that is, in most cases, accessible only by aircraft during the brief Antarctic summer season from November to February. The drilling site at Little Dome C, where the Beyond Epica project operates, is approximately 1,100 kilometers from the nearest year-round research station, at an elevation of approximately 3,200 meters above sea level on the East Antarctic plateau. The temperature at the site averages minus 54 degrees Celsius in winter. In summer, when the drilling season operates, it averages minus 35. The drill used for deep ice coring is a precision instrument approximately 10 meters long and 12 centimeters in diameter, equipped with cutting teeth that shave ice from the walls of the borehole and augers that carry the ice chips up and away from the cutting surface. As the drill cuts deeper, the core of ice above the cutting head is gripped and pulled into the drill barrel, and when the barrel is full, typically after cutting about 3.5 meters of ice, the drill is retrieved to the surface, the core extracted, and the drill returned to the borehole for the next cutting run. The ice cores themselves must be handled with extraordinary care. The moment an ice core is extracted from the drill barrel, it begins to equilibrate with the surface pressure and temperature. Processes that can cause the air bubbles within it to change their characteristics if the core is handled carelessly. Each section of core is measured, photographed, and sampled according to a precise protocol that allocates different portions to different analyses. Some sections go to the gas measurement laboratory, where the air bubbles are crushed or melted to release the ancient air for analysis of CO2, methane, and other greenhouse gas concentrations. Some sections go to the isotope laboratory, where the oxygen and hydrogen isotope ratios of the ice water are measured to reconstruct the temperature at the time the snow fell. Some sections go to the chemistry laboratory for analysis of dust, sea salt, volcanic ash, and other particulate material that was in the atmosphere when the snow was deposited. The air bubbles in the 6-million-year-old ice from the Allen Hills region, the bubbles that contain the oldest directly dated atmospheric samples ever recovered, are not large. They are microscopic inclusions, visible under magnification as tiny spherical voids within the transparent ice crystal. Each bubble contains a vanishingly small volume of ancient air, a few nanoliters at most. Yet, the analytical instruments that modern atmospheric chemistry has developed are sensitive enough to measure the CO2 concentration of a few nanoliters of air with a precision of a few parts per million, enough to determine whether the ancient atmosphere contained 350 or 400 parts per million of CO2, a difference that is scientifically significant. What the 6-million-year-old air from Allen Hills has told us is not comforting. The Miocene period, 6 million years ago, was characterized by CO2 concentrations that were modestly elevated above the pre-industrial level of approximately 280 parts per million. Estimates from indirect proxies had suggested concentrations of perhaps 350 to 400 parts per million. But the Miocene was also characterized by global temperatures approximately 2 to 3 degrees Celsius, higher than the pre-industrial world, and sea levels that were tens of meters higher. These are the conditions that existed when CO2 was at the concentration that the modern world crossed in approximately 2014, and that we are now substantially above. The climate system's response to the CO2 concentrations we have already reached has not yet fully manifested. There is a lag of decades to centuries between greenhouse gas concentration and the full climate response. But the Miocene record is one of several lines of evidence suggesting that the equilibrium climate for current CO2 concentrations is considerably warmer and higher in sea level than the world we currently inhabit. The Beyond Epica core and the Allan Hills ice together cover the full range of climate variability that is relevant to the century ahead. One shows every ice age cycle of the Pleistocene. The other shows what the climate looked like when CO2 was where it is now. The ice does not tell us what will happen. It tells us what has happened in the past when the conditions we are now creating existed. The difference between the past and the future is human agency. The possibility that understanding what the ice says will influence the decisions that determine how closely the future matches the Miocene analog. The scientists drilling at Beyond Epica and the Coldex teams at Allan Hills understand this. They are not working in the abstract. They are reading a message written in frozen water and ancient air, addressed to the civilization that is, right now, deciding how warm the planet will become. The icebergs that carve from the edges of the Antarctic ice sheet and drift northward into the Southern Ocean carry pieces of this archive with them. Some of those icebergs contain ice that is tens of thousands of years old. Ice that fell as snow during the last ice age, that has traveled slowly from the interior of the continent to the coast over the course of millennia, and that will melt into the Southern Ocean over weeks or months, releasing the ancient air bubbles as tiny streams of gas that rise through the water column and return to the atmosphere. The air bubbles in a melting Antarctic iceberg are releasing ancient atmosphere back into the modern sky. The conversation between past and present happens constantly in the Southern Ocean without witnesses. The message in the ice is addressed to us. It was written 6 million years ago. We have only just learned to read it. The life that exists in the hidden Antarctica beneath the ice is, in many ways, the most philosophically arresting aspect of the entire story. In the liquid water of Lake Vostok and the other subglacial lakes, in the thin films of water that exist at the interface between ice and bedrock across much of the Antarctic ice sheet, and in the sediments at the bottom of subglacial lakes that have been accumulating microbial remains for millions of years. There are biological communities, communities of microorganisms that have evolved in complete isolation from the rest of the biosphere, that have never experienced sunlight, that are sustained by the geochemical energy available from the interaction of water with bedrock, and that represent some of the most extreme biological adaptations known anywhere on Earth. The discovery of these communities matters far beyond Antarctica. The conditions in the subglacial lakes of Antarctica, cold temperatures, liquid water maintained by geothermal heat in the absence of sunlight, isolated for geological time from the surface environment, are the closest analog on Earth to the conditions believed to exist in the subsurface oceans of Europa. one of Jupiter's moons, and Enceladus, one of Saturn's moons. Europa's subsurface ocean, which is believed to contain more liquid water than all of Earth's oceans combined, exists beneath an ice shell that may be 10 to 30 kilometers thick, maintained as liquid by the tidal heating generated by Europa's gravitational interaction with Jupiter. Enceladus has been directly sampled by the Cassini spacecraft, which detected water vapor, hydrogen, and organic compounds being vented from the South Polar region. Evidence of hydrothermal activity at the floor of an internal ocean. If life exists in the subglacial lakes of Antarctica, in conditions that are, by any terrestrial standard, extreme, then the case for life in the subsurface oceans of Europa and Enceladus becomes proportionally stronger. Beneath the ice of West Antarctica, the Thwaites Glacier, sometimes called the Doomsday Glacier by the science journalists who cover it, a name that the glaciologists who study it tend to resist, but that captures something real about its significance, is one of the most closely watched geological features on Earth. Thwaites is a massive glacier draining approximately 192,000 square kilometers of the West Antarctic ice sheet into the Amundsen Sea. Its grounding line, the boundary between the glacier and the seafloor, the point at which the glacier lifts off the bed and begins to float as an ice shelf, has been retreating at an average rate of approximately 1 kilometer per year since the 1990s, as warm ocean water penetrates beneath the floating ice shelf and melts it from below. The retreat of Thwaites matters for sea level because the bed of West Antarctica slopes inland, meaning that as the grounding line retreats, it exposes progressively deeper and warmer ice to ocean melting, creating a positive feedback that could accelerate the retreat once it crosses certain thresholds in the bedrock topography. If Thwaites were to collapse completely, if the grounding line were to retreat to the point where the entire West Antarctic ice sheet began to discharge into the ocean, the resulting sea level rise would be approximately 65 centimeters from Thwaites alone, rising to approximately 3 to 5 meters if the entire West Antarctic ice sheet followed. The research published in February of 2025 on the subglacial water flow beneath the entire Antarctic ice sheet has significant implications for understanding Thwaites and the other vulnerable glaciers of West Antarctica. By modeling the complete drainage network beneath the ice sheet, researchers were able to identify the pathways by which meltwater generated in the interior of the continent reaches the coast, and to calculate the contribution of subglacial meltwater to the total water flux at the grounding lines of major outlet glaciers. The results showed that subglacial meltwater is a more significant contributor to grounding line conditions than previously estimated at several vulnerable locations, including near Thwaites, suggesting that the geothermal heat flux and basal melting in the interior of the ice sheet are relevant to the short-term stability of outlet glaciers in ways that earlier models had not captured. Similarly, the July 2025 research from Durham University on the ancient river landscapes buried beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet, the radar-based discovery of vast flat surfaces formed more than 80 million years ago before Antarctica froze, now hidden beneath the ice, has implications for understanding how and where the ice sheet melts from its base. The ancient pre-glaciation landscapes, preserved beneath the ice in the same state they were in when the ice sheet first formed 34 million years ago, represent areas of bedrock that are particularly flat and smooth. areas where the ice sits in direct contact with level rock, rather than sliding over irregular topography. The flatness and smoothness of these ancient landscapes may be a stabilizing factor for the ice above them, reducing the tendency of the ice to slide and providing a more resistant base against which the ice sheet can maintain its position even as the climate warms. The hidden Antarctica that radar and ice cores and satellite measurements are slowly revealing is not simply a scientific curiosity. It is a physical system of global significance, a continent-scale reservoir of fresh water, a geological archive of climate history, a biological laboratory of evolution under extreme conditions, and a tectonic record of the breakup of Gondwana that shaped the geography of the entire southern hemisphere. The ice that covers it is, simultaneously, one of the most important climate stabilizers on Earth and one of the most dangerous potential sources of rapid sea level change. And the bedrock landscape that the ice has been hiding for 34 million years, the mountains and canyons and river valleys and lake basins that existed before the first Antarctic glacier formed, that have been preserved in geological amber beneath the ice, while the world above them went through 50 ice ages, and the evolution of every large organism alive today, is a record of Earth's geological history that we are only beginning to read. Stand at the surface of the Antarctic ice sheet, in the vast flat whiteness near Vostok Station, at minus 60 degrees Celsius, with the polar wind cutting across you. And you are standing on top of one of the most complete geological archives on the planet. 4 kilometers below your feet, Lake Vostok is sitting in its basin in darkness and silence, as it has been sitting for 15 million years. The water at the bottom of the lake has never seen sunlight. It has never been touched by weather. It has been waiting in its geologically patient way for the moment when the surface world above it develops the technology to drill through the ice without contaminating what it finds, to listen to what the oldest lake on Earth has to say. The air bubbles in the ice beneath the Ross Ice Shelf was sealed when our species did not exist. The fossils in the Transantarctic mountains were laid down when Antarctica was forested. The fan-shaped geological structure discovered this week beneath East Antarctica formed when Gondwana was breaking apart, and the southern Atlantic and southern oceans were opening for the first time. All of these things exist simultaneously, layered beneath each other in the geology and the ice, waiting. Antarctica is not a continent of emptiness. It is a continent of depth. The emptiness is the ice. What matters is what the ice has been keeping.